Great. So our speaker today is Crystal Stewart Cortez, and she's going to talk about seed saving, and I'm going to let her do any more introduction than she needs from that. And if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we will fit them in as spaces allow in the presentation. And then we can have more time at the end also.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah. Awesome. So I am a regional vegetable specialist, not a cut flower person. I work with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and have for 18 years now. But in the last few years, last 4 or 5 years, I've also branched out into seed production work. So I think I'm the only extension person in the whole Northeast that's been working on seed from a horticultural perspective and how to grow really good seed and looking at the economics of that. So that's the reason that I'm here today, is to talk to you about seed production in general. And the good news is that flower seed is actually easier in many ways than vegetable seed, aside from the fact that it can be harder to clean. So a lot of the mechanics are the same. And I think that that will lead us to a pretty productive conversation. I may not be able to answer your really specific questions about really specific flowers, but we can talk about resources and general information that will at least get you started with doing this really well. And as Betsy mentioned, I like to take questions throughout the whole presentation. I feel like it's nice to pause and just hear from all of you about anything that you need clarification on, or any experiences that you have. Because I'm not a cut flower person, I may actually just stop and ask people, does anybody have any experience with this if something comes up? So if you don't mind making it a little bit more interactive than some of these webinars are during, that would be delightful for me. So that's all my spiel, and now I'm going to try to get my PowerPoint going. Oh, I need to request sharing from Betsy real quick. We just switched out hosts a few minutes ago, so things are just slightly out of whack from where they would be. Betsy, are you still around, or did you
I
just
am.
step
I just let you do it. So I'll add this. It says multiple panels, so you should be able to.
Okay. Yep, it's letting me.
Excellent.
Fabulous. There we are. Hopefully everybody is now seeing a presentation.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Very good, very good. Okay, let me just minimize some things. And I'm actually going to turn off my video. I don't have awesome bandwidth, so this will keep me from sounding like a robot in the middle of the presentation. All right, so as I mentioned, ask questions the whole time. I see that you're chatting in the chat, but I'm not going to check it. Betsy's going to interrupt me whenever there's a question, and that should work out just fine. And I did borrow some cut flower photos from the closest cut flower operation to me. So the couple of beautiful flower photos that are in this presentation are all from J Flora, which is a flower farm in Montgomery County, which is the closest one nearby to me. And I absolutely love their flowers. Okay, so I'm guessing that you all have reasons to save seed. My top reasons to save seed are the same whether you're saving seed from flowers or vegetables. The biggest one, which I don't think that people are necessarily aware of until they start saving seed, is that the quality of seed that you save is often much higher than the quality of seed that you can buy. And this has a lot to do with the age of the seed itself. So when you buy a seed packet, often it will tell you the last date that it was tested on, and it will give you a germination rate. But that doesn't tell you when the seed was harvested. And germination rates are not the same as seed vigor. So what you'll find when you start saving your own seed and you can use it within 1 to 3 years is that the vigor of the seedlings that you grow is generally much better than it is when you're buying seed, even from large reputable seed companies. So it can be very, very satisfying to grow your own seed and get really, really good results. Doing a little bit of searching about cut flower seed It looks like there's quite a few things that are quite tricky to start, and that folks do experience better luck when they're growing seed and then starting it the next year. So just something to think about if you're thinking about motivating yourself to do this. Another thing that's pretty cool about saving your own seed, especially with all the open pollinated varieties, of which there are many in cut flower production, is that you can gradually select for exactly what you want from within your population. So you can become your own on-farm plant breeder, and you can slowly change a variety to be exactly what you want it to be. You can also start to regionally adapt your seed by doing that. So by choosing seed from the plants that are the most successful and the most beautiful to you, you're able to create plants that are likely to do better in our environment. And of course, doing this is cool. I don't know that 15% is the actual number. We'll have to do some scientific studies. But doing this is really gratifying. It feels like you're completing this loop with the plant. And I feel like it's just a super duper cool thing to do. So if you're looking at doing this yourself, I congratulate you for already being one of the cool kids.
You already have a question.
already have a
Maybe
question.
you have this covered. What are the regulations for selling seed in New York?
Aha.
Specifically on selling dahlia seed.
Yes, yes, we can definitely talk about the regulations for selling seed. I wasn't specifically going to cover it. I was going to just cover the regulations for growing seed, which is plant protections. But we can also talk about the regulations around selling because, yeah, that's an important thing to think about. So why don't we start? Well, actually, after we talk about plant protections, we'll talk about the actual sales of seed. So there are limits to what seed you can save. And the one that people don't think about is actually that some varieties are protected. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I also want to talk about the limitations of producing seed from hybrid crops. We'll talk about isolation requirements, how far apart things need to be if they're closely related enough to cross. And we'll talk about the minimum population sizes that you need to have to prevent what's called inbreeding suppression. So those are some of the things that are really important to think about. And this is actually a crop of shallot seed from my own farm, which it turns out bees are absolutely crazy for. I don't grow any ornamental alliums, but I would consider shallot seed to be pretty darn pretty. Okay, so thinking about this whole plant protection thing, the basic idea here is that when breeders or scientists, whether they're working for universities or seed companies, develop new varieties, there are systems in place to protect their intellectual property, the things that they've developed, from being immediately taken by other people and reproduced. And there's 3 different types of protections that exist. So there's plant variety protections, which covers a lot of the seed crops. And there's a website that you can go to look for specific plant protections, which is listed here. But if you just Google plant variety protection, this is where it's going to take you. You just want to make sure you're at the USDA AMS website. And then there's plant patents, which are really specifically developed for asexually reproduced plants. So this is going to be cuttings, divisions, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a lot of the ornamental industry, but doesn't apply to seed at all. And then there's utility patents, which we don't really need to talk about, but this is more on the working side of things. So this is kind of the segmented information. So rather than a whole plant, it's usually a method or a trait or something that's being patented, which could exist in multiple different varieties. So these are important things to look at. Most things are not protected. If they are protected, often when you buy a seed packet, it's going to say PVP on the seed packet, and that's going to mean that it's plant variety protected. So you'll know that there's some sort of protections on there. And what that means is that you either have to pay a royalty to a company in order to use and reproduce that seed, or that you shouldn't reproduce it at all. So it's just something to be mindful of, and it's something I want to mention. Now, if we totally pivot away from that and we think about what it takes to sell seed, that's a totally different issue. And every state is different. So I'm speaking to New York State right now. But in New York State, and actually it's fairly similar for most states, the absolute minimum that you need to do is you need to have a packet that lists your farm information and the lot, and then you have to have your seed being tested by a seed lab for germination percentages. And you have to meet the minimum germination requirements for that particular crop. And those are all available through whatever seed testing services you're using. I tend to send seed to the Iowa State Seed Lab for testing. It's pretty economical and they're extremely knowledgeable about a ton of different crops. So that's who I would use. That's for retail seed packets. If you want to wholesale seed crops, I feel like that's a really nice place to start. And there's lots of small seed companies in our region who are more than happy to work with different growers, especially if you're certified organic. That's a huge benefit. But even if you're not, if you want to grow cut flowers, there's a pretty high demand for cut flower growers. Hudson Valley Seed Company is generally looking for people to work with. Fedco is looking for people to work with. So if you reach out to some of these companies and just let them know that you're interested, they can often send you a list of things that they're looking for, and you can see if that's something you want to try out. I would recommend practicing a little bit first before you take on one of these seed contracts, just so that you get a sense of, how you feel about it and what it's like to save a little bit larger quantity of seed. So getting started, saving seed for yourself and for 10 of your good buddies is a great way to get going with all this. All right, that makes sense. Did that answer the question that was popping up? If not, just feel free to jump in and let me know. So the other thing that often comes up that people think about immediately is saving hybrid seed. And of course, when you're thinking about hybrid varieties, they have two inbred parents to start with. So if you remember way back to the Punnett squares with the peas, when you take two hybrids and you cross them, there's going to be a certain number of the seeds that come out of that cross that are going to look like each of the parents. And then there's going to be a bunch of stuff in between, right? So you're going to get a mixed bag. It's not that you won't get seed, it's that the seed that you get is going to be unexpected. There are lots and lots of farmers that are working on dehybridizing different varieties. So if you started with an F1 hybrid Snapdragon, you could start growing that out and doing selections and eventually end up with an open pollinated Snapdragon that you like from that hybrid seed. Happens a lot. But the easier thing to do is to look for an open pollinated variety to start with. So I just pulled something off the Johnny's catalog. I pulled Shimmer Organic Celosia seed, which I just happened to have bought this year. And you buy this tiny little seed packet with like 100 seeds in it, and it's $5 or whatever. And then you realize that this being in the Amaranth family, each of those plants is going to make approximately 1 gazillion seeds. So it's like, oh, well, I am definitely going to save some Shimmer Celosia seed this year. And you can see here that it doesn't list it as an F1 hybrid. There's nothing saying that it's plant variety protected here. I would put it into the website just to make sure that it's not before I start saving seed from it. But because it is an open pollinated variety, I should be able to go ahead and save seed. So you always just want to check on that. Make sure that what you want to save is going to do what you think it's going to do and not give you any unusual surprises. So the next big thing that you want to be thinking about is, does the seed that you are looking to grow need to be isolated from other crops in order to prevent cross-pollination? And often our flower crops are what's called outcrossing. So they do want to pollinate with other plants besides themselves. And one of the ways that you can tell that, this picture shows a good example here. This is actually a brassica flower, but you can see that the pistil, the female part of the plant, is the part that's sticking out right underneath that bee's front leg. So that's the receptive female part. When that piece sticks out further than the pollen, which is on those little stamens down below that, that tells you that that plant is trying not to pollinate itself, that it wants pollen from outside of that flower to land on that pistil and pollinate it. When that pistil is down below the pollen, that tells you that it wants to self-pollinate. You know, it's okay if the pollen from that flower falls onto itself. In general, things that want to self-pollinate don't require a lot of isolation from other plants. So you can grow them close together and they're still going to come true to seed. An example from vegetables is lettuce. I have no idea what an example from flowers would be, but they certainly exist. So spending some time gazing really carefully at your flowers is actually important. If you don't have time to do that, because I realize that's a really dorky and time-consuming thing to do, then you can also just use the internet. I did a couple of quick flower searches because I was curious how accurate they would be, and then checked them against some of my book references. And for the most part, the information that comes back, even through like one of the dorky little AI searches, is pretty accurate. So, you know, you'll get a good sense of how much isolation you need from other crops in order to get what you want. The other really safe way to do this is to know about the plant families that you're growing. So if you are really set on saving a zinnia, for example, you know, you can't plant other zinnia varieties nearby. The spacing, the isolation spacing was pretty extensive for zinnias. It was talking about up to a half a mile, but at least a couple 100 feet, which is pretty far on most farms. So you really have to be thinking about, you know, focusing on one variety. And you can do this physically with that couple 100 feet, or you can do it over time. So you could plant successions of zinnias and they could be different varieties, and that would get you through that isolation distance as well. As long as you've got one that's growing up that isn't in flower, it could be right next to the other one, and you wouldn't have to worry about cross-pollination. So there's definitely different ways to think about isolation distances. You just want to make sure you're being very mindful about this piece, and that you're planning things carefully for seed saving, because otherwise you will end up with off types. Yeah, and knowing if you have things that are in the same plant family is a good starting point. Often things that are in the same family won't cross, but you'll want to just make sure you do a little bit of research to find out if you've got two Asteraceae, for example, if they're going to cross or if they're not going to mess with each other. So this is probably the biggest deep dive into homework that you're going to have to do when you're thinking about seed saving. All right, the other thing that's important, and again, this is JFlora, this is not my farm. The other thing that's important to think about when you want to save seed is that you do need to have a minimum population size. So for inbreeding plants, the population size is quite low. So that lettuce example, you only need 10 plants for a population not to experience depression from having too small of a genetic pool. A lot of things are outcrossers. And usually with outcrossers, we're looking at between 50 and 200 plants, which isn't usually a big deal for a cut flower farm, right? Like having 200 zinnia plants isn't going to be that extraordinary. So, you know, just make sure you're keeping that in mind, and that if the plants need to be crossing, you're working with a population that can do that. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to start to see a loss of vigor in those plants. You might see some degradation of the actual flower types, and general failure to thrive. The plants just start to look kind of poopy after a couple generations. So we want to avoid that if possible. Okay, were there any questions about the growing stuff? Everybody good there?
Yeah, everybody's doing well there. But you can add
Okay,
if you need to. I like the technical
okay.
term poopy, so that was good.
Yes, yes, that's a horticultural and a pathological term, depending on how you're working it. Yeah, I bet you've used that word before, Betsy.
Yes, I have.
I'm actually going to stay right here for a second. and talk a little bit about harvesting before I start talking about processing, because this is a prettier slide to stay on for harvesting. So in general, you have to have a fairly good understanding of how your plants mature and set seed in order to know how the harvest is going to work. Oftentimes, if we were growing seed commercially, like if you wanted to grow 5 pounds of Celosia seed, what you're going to do is, and you want to be a cut flower farm. What you're going to do is you're going to harvest from that Celosia for a couple of weeks, take off some of those prime flowers if you want to. Or you're just going to grow a crop for seed. And then you need to know a little bit more about the plant. So you need to know, okay, this is in the amaranth family. I don't actually want a billion Celosia weeds in my future. So you want to balance getting mature seed and not having too much seed rain. So what you would want to do with that particular plant is you would cut the whole plant off at the ground level or so, maybe 8 inches above the ground. And I would take a tarp out to the field with me, and I would lay the tarp right next to that crop of Celosia. And I would lay that right down on that tarp. And then I'm going to take those plants when they've got 75% of the stalk mature, and I'm going to dry them in a high tunnel or in a nice dry barn, somewhere where I can get some good air movement on there. And the plant is going to continue to send a little bit of nutrients to the seeds, and you'll see some of those seeds continue to ripen. But you're not going to get 25% of the seed. 25% are not going to be mature. They either won't come out of the seed head, or they'll be light and they'll blow away during the cleaning process. But with a plant like that, we're going to shoot for the middle, and we're just going to take the whole thing because of the way that the seed is located in those flowers. If we look to the right side of the field here and we wanted to do zinnias, which we wouldn't be able to because there's so many varieties, but we'll pretend it's all one. If we wanted to do those, they mature in a very staggered fashion. So unfortunately, the seed harvesting is going to be as labor intensive as the cut flower harvesting. You're going to be going in and taking one seed head at a time. So what a lot of people will do is they'll harvest for a little while, a couple of weeks off those zinnias, and then they'll pick out the plants that they like the best, flag those plants, and stop harvesting from them to allow the seed to mature. And you'll get a sense of what seed looks like as it matures from these different crops. In the case of zinnias, the petals are going to fall off, and the center is going to start to push out as the seed expands. And then you're going to cut those and dry those. So every single flower is going to be different to harvest and different to manage. But learning, what the maturity indicators are and letting that flower go all the way to maturity is going to be really important. And I don't know that there's one or the other that I would pick to start with. In general, starting with larger seeds is often easier. So things like the zinnias and calendulas and marigolds, big seeds, fairly easy to work with. Anything from the amaranth family or gomphrenias, things with tiny seeds, snapdragons. Actually, snapdragons are kind of easy. But, tiny seeds in general are a bit harder to clean. So you just want to think about that a little bit when you're choosing what you want to save seed from. Okay. So processing, what I'm going to try to do as I go through the processing aspects of seed production is I'll tell you the fancy mechanized ways that you can do this if you're at a larger scale, and then I'll tell you how you can do it, in your garage, which is how a lot of people start. And honestly, with small seed lots, it's how a lot of people continue, because you don't lose seed when you do things by hand, and you lose quite a bit when you use machines. So the things that we will touch on are going to be, we talked about harvesting because we were already on the pretty picture. We're going to talk about drying, threshing, which is the act of removing the seed from the stems, screening, which is just what it sounds like, running seed through different sized screens in order to remove debris, winnowing, which is using air to remove objects that are of similar size but different weight from the seed out of the seed lot. And then we'll talk about good storage conditions. This picture is also from our farm. This is a cucumber seed crop that we grew. We won't talk about wet seed processing at all because you don't have to deal with that. But in vegetable production, a lot of our seed production is with wet seeded crops. So you're scooping seed out of wet cavities, and that's a whole different process. You, unlike us, will never have to deal with fermentation, which is great for you. All right, so we already talked about the 75% rule. The most important thing after you think about pulling that seed when it's 75% mature or more is that you really need to let it dry fully before you start working with it. And what you want to do is you want to keep it in a warm, dry location. So what we've done, because we process a lot of seed on our actual farm, is we've put one caterpillar into full-time seed drying. That's its whole job. So we've got landscape fabric on the ground. We've got mesh benches, wire mesh benches in the middle of this. And we've got insect netting lining that bench. So we've got good air movement from below, but we don't lose our seed. And then we can put 85 bed feet of seed on here at a time and let that dry. Oftentimes, if it's quite warm, this week being a great example, we would put a piece of shade cloth on top of this so that we don't get up above 85 degrees if possible. It happens, it's not the end of the world, but in general, your seed quality is maintained better if you can stay below 85 degrees. You also don't want to allow this to get re-wetted because it does pre-germinate your seed. So, just making sure that you're creating a really good drying environment is important. And if you don't want to have all this going, a bench in your garage with a fan on it is going to be a fine place to start. Putting seed in your greenhouse with a little shade over the top of it so it's not getting super direct sunlight would also be fine. You've got lots and lots of options for where to go with this. And the reason that we have something on the ground here is because a lot of seed tends to explode and go all over the place. So we just don't actually want billions of little tiny plants wherever we're doing our seed drying. And this is a crop of kale seed, in case anybody was wondering what the heck this gigantic blob of seed is. If anybody needs 20 pounds of kale, hook you up. Yeah, actually, this was a contract grow for Fedco for 23 pounds of seed. So that's pretty cut and dry, not to make a pun. It's not too hard to dry seed. Removing it from whatever sort of a container it's in can be a little bit trickier. So there's lots and lots of equipment available. If you decide that you want to get into this in a big way, probably you want to talk to whoever you are going to sell seed to. Hudson Valley Seed Company actually now owns the little red thresher that's on the right here. This is a Sasagawa thresher, which was originally created for soybeans, but it turns out it works extremely well on flowers. So they have purchased this thresher and they're using it for almost all of their flower production because the agitators that are inside of it do a great job of pulling seed off of a variety of different seed pods. We put a couple of those Rubbermaid totes full of echinacea seed through it with the seed heads just fully intact at an event. And the folks at Hudson Valley Seed were in love with this thresher by the end of those 2 totes. So that's a great tool. That's a $4,500 tool with the import costs included. So it's not something that you want to do right away. However, your hands are also great for threshing. So what we're seeing here on the left is Natasha threshing lettuce seed heads. This exact same mechanics would work with any of those plumy seed heads. So things like Celosia are easy enough to hand thresh. You just rub them until they basically come apart. And then we usually do that onto a tarp, sweep that up and take it on to the next stage of cleaning. One thing that is not clear from either of these pictures, because nobody's doing it in these pictures, is that you want to think about whether or not whatever you want to clean or thresh has a lot of fluff involved in it, and lettuce does. So when we are threshing lettuce, not for a photo, we are generally wearing a mask, like an N95 mask. And we're often wearing a pair of goggles just to keep the fluff from ending up in our eyes. So you want to make sure you think about PPE and that you're protecting yourself from any little bits and pieces that would get into your lungs and eyes, because there's a lot. And you're also going to want to probably wear gloves because the act of abrading is a little bit hard on your hands. So leather gloves, or you'll go through numerous pairs of those nitrile dipped gloves when you're cleaning the seed. So the step after that, you've kind of rubbed your seed apart, you've swept it all up, put it into a container. The next thing you're going to want to do is screen that seed, which is going to remove things that are different sizes from your seed. And you can be very fancy and you can buy very expensive seed screens. The ones that are shown here are $150. Or you can build your own using hardware cloth, which is just the metal screening of different sizes that you can get from the hardware store. I've bought, I don't know, 5 or 6 different grid sizes and shapes from our local hardware store, and I've made quite a few of these. And if you're pressed for time, if you go on to any of our online retailers, you can buy what are called soil screens. They look like springform pans, and they have different size screens inside of them. You can buy a set of 5 for like $25. So that's the easiest route and the most economical route. So it's just a question of which of these different ways of screening you want to use. But the key is that you want to have enough different screen sizes that you're able to screen out debris of different sizes. And ideally, I actually like to have 2 or 3 screens that take out debris. And then I like to have a screen that actually allows the seed to be held, but allows some of the dust to fall through. So it's bigger than or smaller than the seed, but not so small that it can't get a little bit of the dirty stuff out. And then you're basically going to put handfuls of material into this little tower of screens that you have in your hands, and you'll gently just agitate that. I'm from California, so I think of it like gold panning. That doesn't mean anything to literally anybody on the East Coast, but you're just going to do this kind of shaking, swirling motion, and gradually, you don't want to do it too quickly, gradually move these materials through the different screens. And then you can toss out the debris, get down to this, the screened material, and you can either decide to run it through again, change the screens up a little bit, or you can move on to the next step. But these are very simple. I've also seen people go to like TJ Maxx and buy different sized colanders. You know, the possibilities are endless for thinking of creative screens to run your different seeds through. But this is going to do at least half of the work for getting your seed to a point where it's clean enough to use.
I'm going to break in here for a second. Kimberly has her hand up, and I
Oh,
will
yeah.
mark you to allow. So, Kimberly, do you want to ask a question?
Yes. So I had started typing it in there. So
Oh,
I was, but it's a long thing to type. So I want to make
Mm.
my own. I have hardware cloth and things already, and I was going to do the things, but you're my subject matter expert, so I need to pick your brain. Like I like
Uh-huh.
details. So I was really doing it more for the soil. But do I need to keep my soil screens separate from, and sorry if you hear my chickens in the background, but
Oh,
do I need
no.
to keep my soil screens separate than my seed screens, or do I just need to kind of like disinfect them with a alcohol slash vinegar bleach solution? Or tell me a little bit more if you can. Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. No, that's a great question. I'm kind of sad I didn't get to hear your chickens, but that's okay. So yeah, that's great. You do not need to worry about contaminating your seed with soil, aside from not wanting little rocks to end up in your seed because then you end up planting little rocks. But the soil itself is not a contaminant issue for your seed. What I would probably do, I like to keep everything dry in my whole seed processing area. So alcohol is going to dry off quickly, obviously, but you might make a little bit of mud. What we use for all of our cleaning in all the seed equipment, because we also have to clean everything in between different seed lots, right? Because you don't want to end up with one seed in the next lot of seed. Same as you wouldn't want to end up with soil in the next lot of seed. So we bought a tiny air compressor and we just blow out everything, all of our mechanical equipment, all of our screens, and that is cleaned enough. Give it a visual inspection, make sure we're not seeing anything, but usually using the air compressor is going to blow out enough dust and all the seed to make us feel pretty good about that. But you don't need to worry about disinfecting because this is a dry process. As long as you're not adding anything wet into it, this is adequate for clean out. So yeah, that's a really good question though.
And what size screens did you use? I'm sorry, I was military, so this is like I've just discovered like I don't even know what size it is, but the tiniest one. Each place has different sizes. Like Tractor Supply Company has different sizes than Lowe's. So you kind of have to, I just want to know, did you get the screen that you use for your house? And then did you the next one up? So anything you can share, I'd be grateful for. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, there's no cut and dried answer for everybody because all the seeds are different sizes. I have 16 different screens that we use and that I'll share with folks because we have a mobile seed cleaning unit that goes around. And they run anywhere from a screen that is, I think it's 1/3 of a millimeter. So basically, that's one that lets dust through all the way up to 5 millimeter circular openings. I also have screens with different shapes and sizes of openings. There's also screens that have a herringbone pattern so that lettuce seed can go through them. So basically, the answer is going to depend on what kind of seed you're cleaning and what the size of that seed is. You might end up having to buy specific screens for specific seeds. A lot of people clean things in the amaranth family, and that is going to lead you to probably buying at least one specialty screen that has those really fine meshes that are probably 2 or 3 times finer than a window screen. But if you're doing a lot of larger seeds like marigolds and things from that family, you can get away with window screen and that'll work out fine. And that hardware cloth is fantastic for getting a lot of the debris out. I like it's like a 2 millimeter hole in the hardware cloth for my general cleanup. So I've got one that's like 4 millimeter and then I've got one that's 2 millimeter, and I almost always stack those two to catch a lot of the little twigs and pieces of the flower that have come off that aren't seed, and that works out really well. I realize that's not the most precise answer for you. You're almost going to have to measure the seed from the crops you want to clean and make sure you have screens that are in that ballpark. So that's probably what I would do.
No, you don't understand. You're helping me you're my chat GPT. You're helping me build my SOP because I'm a newer farm operation, but don't get me twisted. I'm a powerhouse. So I'm hiring the interns and I'm going to take what you said and plug it into chat GPT to spit out SOP. So the fact that you said nestle them, that was mind blowing. I know you're not reading the chat, but thank you.
And also I was going to make the
Yeah.
point that sometimes you want the seed to go through and sometimes you want the seed to stay in and the other stuff to go through, right?
Yes.
So you need to think about what's going where and how you're planting. So you keep the big stuff out, you want the seed to go through, then you want the little stuff to go through and to keep the seed in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I usually stack 3 or 4 of these screens, and I usually run it through at least twice, and I often will change the configuration or swap out a couple of screens as I'm going. So yeah, it's really trial and error. And make sure you're doing this on either a table or on a tarp, because there's a guarantee that at least once you're going to dump all your seed on the ground. So it's just part of the process. I have found it to be unavoidable. All right, are we good on screens?
We're good.
Cool. Fabulous. All right. Now comes the even funner part. So winnowing is another part of a very ancient tradition of seed cleaning, which we have modernized in some kind of silly ways that, you know, if you've ever seen a picture of a person with like a large, fairly flat basket and they're tossing the seed up into the air, that's how traditional winnowing works in most cultures. You're tossing seed from usually some sort of a basket made of organic material, whether it's wicker or woven fabric, and you're tossing that seed into the air and allowing the wind to blow material out of that basket and then catching the seed again. That is an incredibly skillful thing to do. I've tried to do it. I am really bad at it. I did not have a grandmother teaching me to do that when I was little, and for that, I will always be sad. But it turns out if you do not have that skill set, there are easier ways to go about winnowing. So the setup that we're looking at here is from a really cool seed farm up in Quebec. This is Ferme Quatre Temps, and they are growing all different kinds of seed. And they look for low-tech, inexpensive ways to do things that you could also spend a whole lot of money doing. The fancy way to do winnowing is to buy a winnow wizard, which is a very expensive piece of equipment that does basically the same thing. But 2 box fans, you'll notice they have 2 box fans set up back to back, pointing in the same direction, obviously, and 3 Rubbermaid totes with a tarp underneath is also a really great way to winnow. So what we're doing here, and you have to mess with the speed. You have to figure out what speed you need. Start with low. Start with 1 fan on low, then go to 2 fans as you need to. But basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to have your healthy, fully mature seed drop into your first bin. And then you're having things like your heavier pieces of chaff. So little pieces of the flour and things like that are dropping into that second bucket. And the third bucket is going to contain a lot of the fluffy stuff. So that's just going to blow into that third bucket. The other reason we have 3 buckets is because it takes a little while to figure this out. So you're going to pour some seed. It's going to blow into all 3 buckets. You're going to mess with your fans. But you're just going to keep playing with it until you get things to drop the way you want them to. And in the meantime, you can always pour what is in those buckets back into your original container so you can start the process over again. But it's a little bit of trial and error. But this is going to do the second half of your seed cleaning to get it to the point where you could actually use it. And you'll have, you know, really good seed. It is important to go through a process like this, if for no other reason than to blow out the seed that isn't viable. So you'll have seed that comes through the screening process. It looks like good seed, but it's much lighter than the seed that is viable because it's empty inside. So those seeds are now going to be blown out of there, and you're not going to end up planting them and having, you know, 30% of your seeds not be anything that you can work with. So this is a fun step. Again, you want to make sure you're wearing a mask and maybe goggles in order to protect yourself. And you can see this farm does a lot of their work right in the high tunnel. So they basically do everything in a seed cleaning tunnel. This is a seed farm, so this is all they do. And it's not all they do, but it's a lot of what they do. So this protects them from the environment and gives them a nice, convenient working environment. So pretty fun. Okay, now it's time for us to talk a little bit about storage. So you don't want to go to all this work and get to the end of this process and then have your seed mold in storage. So there's lots of ways to dry seed. You want to make sure your seed's fully dry, and that can be a process that you just go through with time. I like to leave seed in a dry storage room out on paper towels until I feel like it's definitely dry. I actually have a little tiny moisture meter that I can pour my seed into, and it'll tell me what % moisture it's at. Most people don't have that. But you know, in general, you're looking for like 7 to 15% moisture, depending on the seed. If you don't have that, leaving this in a very dry room on paper towels for a couple of weeks after you've gone through all of these processes is generally going to be sufficient to get you pretty close. The next thing that you're going to want to do is you're either going to store your seed in paper bags, which you then put into plastic bags. So the paper can absorb any additional moisture, but the plastic is going to protect you from changes in humidity. So basically you're allowing it to dry more if it needs to, but you're not allowing the air to rehydrate it. Or you can actually store your seed in mason jars and put a little desiccant packet in there, and that works out really well too. So the little desiccant packets that you see in containers of food sometimes, or in shoes or whatever, you can actually buy those through Uline. And they're not food grade, so obviously don't eat them, but they're okay to touch your food. So you can just throw one of those into every container, close that lid tight, and that seed should then be stored somewhere cool. Air temperature should be like 75 degrees or lower. The lower your temperature, the better your seed is going to store. So a lot of people actually store their seed in a refrigerator, in airtight containers. That's a great way to do it. If you don't have that capacity, then room temperature or lower. You never want to store your seed anywhere warm, and you want to keep it dark if you can. And if you do that, and you also want to make sure wherever you're storing it that you label it really well. So you're putting the name and you're putting when it was harvested. And then you could look up how long different kinds of seed are supposed to last. It's actually pretty impressive how long some of these seeds will last and stay viable. But that gives you an idea of when you need to refresh your seed stock, right? So every 2 or 3 years, you might be saying to yourself, I need to save seed from this crop again. And then you can get into a bit of a routine with it. And eventually you'll end up with, a really good supply of your own seed, or you can pivot to growing some crops and selling them as seed. So yeah. So there's a lot more to it. Obviously, this is the intro to seed saving, but there's a lot of really great resources out there. I did a quick search for flower seed resources. It looks like there's quite a few flower farms that already have seed saving resources, and they were quite good. Of course, my computer decided to do like a full system restart this morning, and I lost all the windows that I opened up last night that I was going to share with you of good resources. But I'm sure you can do those same searches yourself. It's definitely worth looking at a few of those. I think they were really good. And if you do have questions, I am more than happy to answer them now, or if you come up with questions in the future about seed saving. I did not leave my email, but I'll drop it in the chat.
So
you can ask me questions later.
They can put questions in the chat. Would be great. Thank you, Crystal. That was really interesting. I learned
Good.
that too. And so someone asked about having the Zoom, but we everyone that's attends, and then we also put it on the website. The recording of this will be available in a few days. I am going to put into the chat our website. Well, nobody's asking questions right at the moment. Somebody got excited about seed saving, which is a good thing. So this is our website for the Cornell's Cut Flower program, and it has our events. It has also the way to get to the YouTube to see all the previous webinars. It has the list of the webinars that are coming up, and I wrote myself a note, Yolanda, that we need to put the events of the 2 Twilight meetings, because there's 2 Twilight meetings coming up. Put those in under events so that people can check out our website and see what we've got going. Let's see if we got anybody else. Yeah, I agree. This was a really great overview of the things to think about, and that it can be a little bit complicated to do it so that you actually have good seed at the end. You just have to kind of try it out and see what works.
Exactly. Yeah. But it is pretty cool when you start growing your own seed. It makes you feel super self-sufficient.
Are you selling your seed as well? Are you going through some of the companies like Fedco?
Yeah, we only wholesale at this point.
Okay.
And there are more and more small seed companies out there. So there's lots more options for wholesaling. It is a bit of a process to retail seed. So yeah, we've avoided that. You'd be surprised to learn that I actually have enough irons in the fire. I have too many irons in the fire. Yeah, but wholesaling is actually a really nice way to dip your toe into all this. And if anybody wants to follow just like a really cool farm that does a lot of flower seed production on the West Coast, I just appreciate how they share things. Summertime Seed Company out in Oregon is doing a really good job on Instagram of sharing what they're doing. They're a pretty new company, and I like how they share about their seed production.
Yeah, I don't know why these links are so long, but I put in one Hudson Valley Seed, and this is the one for Fedco.
Yeah, and Hudson, yeah, if you're close to Hudson Valley Seed Company, they do field days every early fall. So they'll do like a week of field days. I may or may not be involved in them this year. I'm not sure yet, but it's a nice time to kind of see what goes into the seed side of things. They tend to share a lot about growing and more, home gardener oriented content on the interwebs. But during those field days, they'll share more about the actual seed production, which is cool because they do a great job.
I'm not seeing it listed, but anyway, we can find that. Oh, thanks, Yolanda. Yolanda put in the 2 events in. And the other
Nice.
one you said was called Summertime Seed?
Yeah. I had an opportunity to tour their facility this last year, and it was very cool.
And I should stop. While I'm thinking of it, I should stop recording. But feel free to put in, we've got a couple more minutes if anyone has questions.
They're just